Hi, welcome back to Rebel Movement Podcast. My name is Billy. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and I'm really excited. This week we're doing an interview. I have a guest, and I decided this time to record. I decided to start recording my interviews a little bit differently. As you can tell, it's just me here right now. Maybe you can't tell, you can't see where I am. I'm recording the intro and outro separately so that we can just get right into the interview when we start it. You know what I mean? It feels a little bit more natural. I don't know. Just testing it out, seeing how it goes. Um, I wanted to give a little, I don't even know, like it's not really a disclaimer, but this episode is all about menstrual health. And I think it's super important, honestly, should be talked about way more. And I just wanted to say at the beginning here, for anyone who is queer, non-binary, trans, has different pronouns of any sort. As someone who's non-binary, I felt like it's really important. And even if I wasn't, I think I would feel this too. But I think it's really important to change our language around things like menstruating and pregnancy and things like that. I think a lot of times, unfortunately, there's still a lot of really gendered language, which can be really exclusive, and I'm not a fan of it. I'm not going to lie that I'm taking a pre and postnatal training right now. I would not recommend it. It's great. Actual information is great. Would not recommend it because I don't find it very gender inclusive. So both me and Ashley, the wonderful guest this week, have the same feelings about being inclusive with our language. So you won't hear any words like women's cycles or whatever. The only time that there is some sort of mention of it is when we're talking about the actual hormone cycles. Because of the name, I'm not a person who is a pro in this, hence why we have a why we have a guest. But there's mention of male hormone cycle and female hormone cycle, just because it's more like the scientific part of it. Otherwise, that's really all you're going to hear. You'll hear language like bleeders and people with periods. And yeah, I just feel like disclaimer is not really the right word, but I feel like I really want to put the intention at the beginning here, just in case you're like, ooh, I don't know what the language is going to be like. It's going to be inclusive, as inclusive as I can be. And I know that like saying that, I mean, we're getting a little derailed here, but we can only ever be as inclusive as possible. Inclusive is kind of a buzzword sometimes, and often it's used in a way that's like you say you're inclusive, but you're not inclusive. When I say it around here, I really do try to mean it, and I'm always open for feedback. So if you listen to this episode and you have any feedback for me and how I could do better, what we could change, what I could add, let me know. I will also say there will be another episode at another time that focuses more on the hormonal cycles of trans folks and trans folks experiences with hormones and things like that. It's just a whole other episode, whole other guest or potentially guests. But with all that said, we'll get to the episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm really excited. I learned a lot in this episode, and I'm so excited for you to learn more too. Before we get started, I forgot to give a little disclaimer. I have been having so many different tech issues the last couple of weeks. I don't know what's been going on. For this episode, got onto the call and my mic wouldn't work. Tried a million different setups that all seemed to work earlier. None of them worked. I finally went with a pair of headphones that I don't usually record with. They're not the best audio quality. So this episode is not my part of the audio, is not the best audio quality I've ever had. I did try to fix it up a little bit in post, but just as a little heads up, the interview was amazing, definitely worth listening to. My audio is not quite, it's just a little bit more muffled and not as good quality. Thanks. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited for our conversation today. Can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us your name and pronouns and all that?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Sorensen. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm tuning in from Atlanta, Georgia, which I just very recently moved here. but just a little bit about me and what I do. I'm a yoga teacher and cyclical living mentor. And that is a title you may or may not have heard before, but basically it means I help menstruators understand their menstrual cycles, and both from a sense of understanding their menstrual cycle to help support the cycle and make it healthier and make it better, a better experience, but also understanding the cycle in a little deeper sense in how to use that cycle and use that wisdom in your life. So living in alignment with your cycle and supporting it so that it can support you. And primarily I work with people combining cycle education because, and I know we're going to talk about this, it's just we have such a lack of access to education about our bodies as menstruators. Probably all humans have a lack of access about our bodies, just period, but especially as menstruators. And combining that education with yogic practices and yogic philosophies, because those practices help you understand yourself on a better level, help you connect with yourself and just take care of yourself. So that's what I'm all about.
Thank you. I love that. Was a really great explanation. I'm really excited to talk about all this stuff because we were just talking a little bit before, but it feels very good timing with some of the stuff coming up in future episodes. And I think it's just the cause that's just, I don't know if cause is the right word, a subject that's I think really important to talk more about. I
Yeah.
think you're totally right. There's a lack of education, a lack of understanding. I think in some cases, lack of, I don't know if research is the right word, but I heard,
Definitely, yeah.
yeah. I've
Unfortunately.
never done a lot of like looking into this. I think because I feel like I would get too angry about it. But I have heard recently that there was a couple of different things that there's, of course, there's not a lot of testing with menstruators or
Mm-hmm.
AFAB folks for drugs and medication
Oh
and
yeah,
things like
yeah.
ADHD, and that
Oh
they didn't
yeah,
even start to
it's
test.
literally mind-blowing when you start to
Yeah.
dig into it. But like just a very simple explanation or like a very simple example of just how little things like menstrual cycle health is studied. Like up until I think it was January this year or December 2023, they were not even using menstrual blood to test menstrual cycle products like
Yeah,
tampons and
that's
pads, which I'm like, what were you
ugh.
using? Because, oh my
Yeah,
God, that's the most simple thing that you could have
yeah,
been doing this entire time.
right.
That is
I
such a
thought it was
perfect example of like what the
yeah.
hell is going on.
It exactly. I heard that it was water, but I haven't like fact checked that. But that's
Yeah.
absolutely baffling. It's like all the times that menstrual products have just not worked, and now I feel like, oh, well,
Oh,
obviously, like
right.
what?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because they're not even testing it with the substance that it's meant to absorb. It's like
yeah.
if you've
How
ever
are
had
you gonna
a
know?
period in your life, you know that menstrual
Hmm.
blood has nothing like water. It's
Hmm.
thick, it's viscous, it has chunks of tissue. Like it's nothing to do with water. So,
Yeah,
don't even get me started. I'm already,
yeah,
getting riled up basically.
yeah. Me too.
Um, but that's how the thing is going to go. Also, I just realized I
Yeah.
forgot to say I wanted to do a little cycle check-in in my intro. I like to
Mm.
start my podcast off that way. Sometimes I forget my own podcast, but I am currently on cycle day 4. So I am currently bleeding, but I'm moving into, and we're going to go through the kind of the basics of the cycle. So you might be thinking, what does cycle day 4 mean? It means I'm on my
Hmm.
period still, but beginning to reawaken, come back to life, coming into the next phase of the cycle, which we'll get all into, but wanted to throw that in so you know where I'm coming from today.
That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. It's actually very refreshing to just hear it talked about so normally. Like it's just a normal thing. And I
Oh,
know that sounds
I love talking about cycles. So
yeah.
I'm your cycle, announcer.
Hmm.
Just
Perfect.
to help normalize it. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I mean, it's also very relevant to what you do, but yeah, it's so refreshing for it to just be normal and not something that's, people use. I don't know if you've heard people use, like alternative language to describe, even instead of using the word period.
Mm.
It's really nice to hear just ordinary language.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, oh yeah, instead of like Shark Week or Ant
Yeah.
Flow or some of these other sort
Yeah,
of code words.
exactly.
I mean,
Code word is a good way of putting it.
yeah, the kind of coded language really, and we're kind of jumping into the deep end here, but really it's like it just comes from this place of shame surrounding our cycles, of trying to hide it. And it's like, but why should I be ashamed of my cycle? Like why
Mhm.
should I not say I'm bleeding? Why should I not, like why should that be something that we're so afraid to talk about? And on the other hand, acknowledging that some people may not be in a safe space to disclose those things. So for me, it's kind of taking advantage of the privilege that I have where I live in the environments that I'm in to like just kind of break down that awkwardness for people who are able and and want to maybe share, but they feel like they don't want to be the weird one. I'm fine being the weird one. I
Mhm.
don't mind.
Yeah, that's very fair. I really like that. I don't know if I should share mine. I actually don't remember. I think it's like 10 days still expected,
Mm.
period. But my cycle is all messed up.
Well,
Um,
we're gonna get into it today. Maybe
yeah,
maybe you'll gain some awareness and clarity about
maybe.
what's going on with your cycle too.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So why don't we? I feel like I'm getting so excited about everything, but I feel like I'm gonna pause on that. And can we go back? Can we go to the basics? Can you like
Absolutely. Yeah,
walk us through all the basics?
totally. So what I would love to do is just run through the basic events that are happening inside your body and it's kind of hard to conceptualize sometimes. And so I just want to walk through basically everything that's happening within your reproductive system from day 1 of your cycle all the way up until day 29. But before I even jump into that, I also want to say I'm using 29-day cycle as our sort of example because it is the quote unquote average cycle length. But that doesn't mean that if your cycle is not 29 days, that it's not healthy or that something's wrong with it. There can be a lot of wiggle room and a lot of variation, and all of that can still be considered healthy cycles. So just keep that in mind as I give examples of roughly happening, day this to day, day X to day Y or whatever. Again, rough kind of guideline and variation within these is perfectly healthy and normal. But I say we just jump in at the beginning. So the beginning of your cycle is your period. And you might think, well, it's kind of like the beginning of a circle. It's kind of hard to pinpoint. But I think we most often consider or we discuss the period being the beginning of your cycle because, frankly, it's just the most easy to be aware of because it's kind of
Totally
hard to miss
fair.
blood coming out of your body.
Yes.
So day 1 of your cycle, pretty clear. Day 1 of your cycle is day 1 of your period. And that's the first day that you need an actual like menstrual product to like a tampon pad, menstrual disc, reusable pads, whatever it is, that period underwear, whatever it is that you use to soak up the blood. So maybe you have a day of spotting that's kind of light, and then you're like, oh, now it's really starting. So that's day 1 of your cycle. And what's happening hormonally at this point in your cycle is estrogen and progesterone, which I kind of talk about as the 2 star hormones of your cycle, are at their lowest points during this phase. This is the menstrual phase, the actual bleeding days of your cycle. And when estrogen and progesterone are low, you're likely feeling lowest energy during this phase. And really, what's happening in terms of like physically what's happening, the events that are happening, the muscles of the uterus are contracting, releasing to push out that uterine lining because pregnancy did not occur. So it's pushing out the uterine lining past the cervix through the vagina. And of course, you see that as blood and tissue exiting into the toilet or wherever it is that you notice it first, usually in the cute underwear. Like, let's be real.
Of course, always.
Of course, every time, like put on white pants, you're going to get your period.
Yeah, it's
Um,
just the rule.
it's just a rule. It's just the rule of being a bleeding person.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's your period. You probably are most familiar if you already are menstruating, you're probably most familiar with this phase because again, it's pretty hard to miss. And I would say the most famous / infamous phase of the cycle. After bleeding ends, we're moving into the follicular phase. Now, it's called this because of what's happening inside of the ovaries during this phase. So your period is ending, you're starting with that kind of where I'm at right now. You might be feeling that kind of upswing of energy, and that's really due to estrogen. So during this phase, estrogen is rising and estrogen becomes the dominant hormone. FSH, or the follicle stimulating hormone, signals to the follicles that are still inside your ovaries to continue their development journey. They actually take about like 3 full months to grow and develop, but this is like the last stage, the last push to who is going to become and grow into an egg, actually. So multiple follicles are developing inside your ovaries, and as they develop, they're producing estrogen. So during this phase, estrogen is rising, and you might be feeling that upswing of energy. Estrogen supports better communication, might support you feeling a little more social, a little more outgoing, a little more confident. So it's kind of expected that you might be feeling that during this phase. As you, let me say two. So 2 more things about estrogen, what it's doing inside the body. It's starting to grow and thicken that lining. So it was just basically wiped clean during your period. And now it's like, okay, we're ramping up again and starting that whole process over. So the uterine lining begins growing and thickening to support a potential possible pregnancy. And what is also happening is estrogen causes the cervix to produce cervical mucus, which really just helps create an ideal environment for sperm survival. So there's a lot going on inside your body that you aren't necessarily aware of as easily as, period. But that's what's happening. So your body is kind of growing and producing and ramping up, and all leading up to the height of your cycle, which is the 3rd phase. And that's ovulation, or the ovulatory phase. So ovulation is really just one moment. It's the moment the egg leaves the ovary, but you can refer to the ovulatory phase as being like the kind of couple days before, couple days after that moment, that group of days that's affected by this hormone cocktail. So leading up to ovulation, estrogen is rising and it peaks right before ovulation. Those high estrogen levels tell the body the egg is ready, it's time to ovulate. And that's what prompts the release of LH, or the luteinizing hormone. And that's what actually triggers the egg to burst out of the ovary and begin its journey down the fallopian tube. And then testosterone also peaks right before ovulation. So this whole combination, estrogen's high, you have LH coming into the picture, you have testosterone high, all this combines to kind of energetically match the event that's happening. It's like the climax, it's the high moment in terms of your reproductive system. And you might be feeling that way energetically as well. Maybe feeling your most confident, feeling sexy, probably a higher libido because of that high testosterone. That kind of combination is helping you feel that like, ooh, that ooh vibes. The main character vibes. I always call it the main character. Yes, total main character vibes. The egg is ready. It's like, I'm out, it's beginning its journey to if it's going to become a baby. So after ovulation, we enter the 4th and final phase of the cycle, which is the luteal phase. And this is the phase of the cycle that is usually the longest, and it's actually kind of the most fixed in terms of length. So typically the luteal phase is going to be around 12 to 16 days. And this is the time that you might feel that energetic shift in your cycle. For the first half, from your period all the way up until ovulation, estrogen is the dominant hormone. Estrogen is rising, rising, rising. You're feeling that like glowy, fun, maybe highness. But as soon as ovulation happens, you might feel that shift. And this is when progesterone becomes the dominant hormone. So our second, what I call our star hormones. And I like to describe estrogen and progesterone as kind of like the yin and yang energy. Estrogen is the yang. It's the high, whereas progesterone is the yin. And so you kind of feel that balance in these different halves of your cycle. And understanding that is really helpful later on when we're going to talk about, how to align your life and how to take advantage of your cycles. Understanding we're not meant to feel the same way every day, which I think is a really huge lesson to understand as a menstruator. So after ovulation, after that egg bursts forth out of the follicle, a little structure forms that's left behind and is formed called the corpus luteum. And that is what basically sets a little timer for the length of the luteal phase and begins producing progesterone. Progesterone rises midway through the luteal phase, and then begins to drop as you get closer and closer to your period. What progesterone is doing in terms of internal activities that are going on, it helps further proliferate that uterine lining to make it even thicker and juicier. You could think of like if estrogen and progesterone were builders, estrogen kind of puts up the walls and progesterone like insulates the walls. So it's thickening it all up, making it nice and juicy for a potential egg to implant. And the other thing that progesterone does during this phase is dry up cervical mucus. It thickens cervical mucus to make it an inhospitable environment for sperm. It closes the cervix because at this point, if the sperm haven't yet reached the egg, if they haven't already been in place to wait for that egg when it ovulates, they miss their chance. The egg only survives for 12 to 24 hours max. So there's no reason to let in any other sperm, any potential germs or bacteria or anything like that. Like no foreigners welcome in terms of this part of the cycle. No sperm allowed. And it's really just this phase of waiting. You'll talk about in the fertility episode, this part of the cycle is referred to as the 2-week wait, because once you ovulate, it's roughly 2 weeks until either you can confirm that fertilization did happen and the egg implanted and you're going to, it'll continue to grow and develop, or it didn't and you'll get your period. So in the first half of this cycle, or the first half of this phase, of the luteal phase, you're kind of still riding the high of that high estrogen, high testosterone before ovulation. And then you have the rising progesterone, which has a more energetically soothing effect. I've heard it personified as kind of like the laid back, like chill aunt. Like maybe she like smokes a J and she's kind of like relaxed. She needs more snacks. That's kind of how it's personified. And so you can think of in this phase, you actually have a higher need for a higher caloric need, a little more need for a deeper type of rest, prioritizing yourself. I think of it as the phase of the self-protection phase, because you're really waiting your body in terms of, not necessarily you emotionally, but your body's waiting to see if you got pregnant. And so it's really this phase of like, you're kind of pausing and waiting to see what's going to happen. It's a phase where you're just in your lane, you're focusing on yourself. And then as you get closer and closer to your period, your body is realizing, if pregnancy did occur, of course, that's a whole other podcast. But if it did not occur, estrogen and progesterone both are dropping down. Your body realizes pregnancy did not occur. And that, again, triggers your next bleed. Once the estrogen and progesterone drop low enough, that's what triggers your uterine lining to shed again. And we start all over. So I know that was a lot, but I could just go through it really quickly again, a little more briefly. So during your period, hormones are low, probably energy is low. As your period ends, you enter the follicular phase, a lot of growth, a lot of development happening. You feel that energy begin to rise. Probably you feel that energetic peak right around ovulation. And then you enter a phase of kind of steady energy, just kind of focusing on yourself. And then, of course, pregnancy didn't occur. Hormones dropped low. Period starts again.
Mm-hmm. So it is like, the way you describe it sounds like a wave going up and then going back down and then up and then back down.
Perfect way to describe it. And that's exactly what it looks like. And I know this is I don't think you do you do a video for the podcast, or is it just audio? Because I know they won't be able to see necessarily.
Yeah, usually just audio, but you can put the video in. Who knows? Maybe I'll put it on YouTube.
Yeah, there you go.
Not but without you knowing
exactly. That, I'll draw it just for your benefit, just for funsies.
Okay, perfect.
So I'll draw this chart, and this is just a simple, L-shaped chart. Really, this is how estrogen, well, let me do it a little more specifically. See, my pen, it really peaks right around ovulation, this middle point, peaks a little during that luteal phase, and then drops down. This is your period, and this is your period. Luteal, the progesterone peaks too, right here in the second half of your cycle after ovulation. Yeah. So it really is wave-like, because you have the low rising up, dropping down a little, rising up, and then dropping down again. Not interesting for no one who's watching, but
I mean, I was just going to say, for those people who aren't watching, the first line is estrogen, correct?
Correct.
And it has like a slow peak and it goes high and then it goes down a bit. And then there's a second peak that's not quite as high and then down. And then the progesterone, did I say that right?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. Is a peak, but it looks like it kind of lines up to like the second half. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
yep.
Everyone's caught up who was just doing audio version.
Perfect.
Maybe this will be the first one I put on YouTube. It feels like the appropriate episode for it. Yeah. Thank you so much for that explanation. That's really helpful. I learned a lot. There's some of this stuff is stuff that I think I've learned a little bit and it just for some reason doesn't stick, but I really liked the way you just explained all those and the analogies you use because my brain works in analogies and I really liked, it was a really good explanation.
Me too.
Thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad. My pleasure.
Is there anything that you find that people often misunderstand about the menstrual cycle?
That's a really good question. And yes, absolutely. I think a few things. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the structure or like the timeline of the cycle is about ovulation. Like, when is ovulation happening? And this is really important to understand for a few reasons. If you are trying to get pregnant, if you're focused on fertility, of course, it's really important for a very obvious reason. Like, you need to know when the egg is available, because the only way that you can get pregnant is having an egg and sperm in the same place at the same time. Both alive, also, should clarify. Healthy egg and sperm in the same place at the same time. And the thing about ovulation is that it can change timing cycle to cycle. It's not always on day 14. I think that's the biggest misconception, is that ovulation happens on day 14, but really the timing of ovulation can change even in the same person, cycle to cycle. And I think that is really probably one of the most like mind-blowing things I realized when I learned about my cycle, is that it wasn't necessarily happening when the book said it was happening or when the app said it was happening. And so to get really clear about understanding that, really the answer is to start cycle tracking and tracking your cycle. And I can talk a little bit about that later on. But before I forget, I want to say it's also important to understand when ovulation is happening. Even if you never have any interest or intention of getting pregnant whatsoever, understanding when ovulation is taking place in your cycle can give you really key insights to your own cycle health, because the timing of ovulation also lets you define and see clearly the length of your luteal phase. And think, referring back to how I kind of described estrogen and progesterone as they're not necessarily opposites of each other, but they're more like kind of two halves of a whole. And in order to have healthy periods and to have pain-free periods and to have little to no instance of PMS, cramping, heavy bleeding, to create more regular cycles, you really want to find that balance of estrogen and progesterone. And so when you're having really bad PMS, when you're having really painful or really heavy periods, typically that is an indication to you that estrogen is too high in relation to progesterone. Now, that could be a result of multiple different scenarios. Maybe you're just overproducing estrogen. Maybe you have a lot of environmental factors that are raising estrogen levels through either xenoestrogens in the cleaning products, fragrances, all of that stuff, or even phytoestrogens, eating a lot of estrogen dominant foods like soy products, for example. But it also could mean you're underproducing progesterone. And the only time of your cycle you're producing progesterone is in that luteal phase. And so it's really important, if you actually want to understand the health of your cycle and create healthier cycles, you really want to determine first and foremost if you're ovulating, and secondly, at what point of your cycle are you ovulating? Because that helps you see the length of the luteal phase. You're wanting to see it for minimum around 12 days, ideally. Even 14 days is like amazing. Your body's doing like its best. It's doing excellent. And if it goes past 17 days, then likely you're pregnant. So that's also helpful to know when you've ever had that, if you've ever had that experience of feeling like your period's late and feeling nervous that you're pregnant, if you had unprotected sex with a penis owner and you're like, I don't know if I'm pregnant or what's going on, that also can be really helpful if you can identify when ovulation happened, you'll know, oh, I just ovulated 3 days later than usual. I ovulated a little later than I expected, rather than, oh my God, my period's late, quote unquote. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is not understanding that, or how to identify when ovulation is happening. And kind of the other side of that coin, a different misconception, but really it's kind of the same misconception, but you might not realize it's the same misconception, is that ovulation is actually the event. It's actually the most important part of the cycle. It's the most important event. And that is what is determining the length of your overall cycle. I might have mentioned a little earlier on, the luteal phase is kind of the most fixed in terms of the length of that phase. Really, what happens when you experience what feels like a late period is that your ovulation was delayed. And that can happen for so many different factors. If you are stressed, if you're moving, if you were exposed to illness, if anything like that, that kind of throws your body for a little unexpectedness, then your ovulation may be delayed. And that is what actually pushes back the length of the timing of your period, I should say. So yeah, I would say that those are probably the two most common misconceptions that people have, is just about ovulation, when it's happening. And also maybe even more simply putting it, ovulation only happens once per cycle, and you can only get pregnant at that time. And so that really blew my mind, because I grew up with this fear of, if you ever have unprotected sex, you will get pregnant and die. Because they say in Mean Girls, like, you will get chlamydia and die, or whatever he says. But yeah, I think I grew up with this insane anxiety, this insane fear of just being terrified that I could get pregnant at basically the drop of a hat. And now that I understand more how our cycles work, and that ovulation only happens at one time, the egg only lives for 12 to 24 hours. Sperm can survive for up to 5 days in the cervix when cervical mucus is present. Therefore, the fertile window is between those 5 days and the day of ovulation. Outside of that, you cannot get pregnant. And so that was really mind-blowing to me. I think that's probably the biggest misconception, that ovulation only happens once. How to identify, understanding that it could vary a little bit cycle to cycle, and that the timing, really the overall timing of your cycle, is determined by that ovulation event.
Yeah, I would say that's mind-blowing, and I agree. I don't think I definitely grew up with the same fear. Another thing it sounds like, from what you've said and from some other research I've done, is that really painful periods, unless barring things like PCOS and endometriosis, are not like just a normal part of having a period.
Yeah, that's true. I feel that actually, I take it back, my previous statement. That's the biggest misconception.
I feel like they can be tied for first.
They can be tied for first, but absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a person who has a very, very painful period, and I have ever since I was a teenager, maybe before, like maybe when it started, I can't really remember. And anytime I've tried to ask, the doctor for help, they just prescribe birth control, of course. And then it wasn't until like last year, I think, that they didn't take it seriously enough to, they don't think, I'm on the wait list for a referral, but they finally gave me a like prescription painkiller. But it just, so many times of going to the doctor, and that literally the male doctor being like, oh, this is just cramps. That's just what cramps are. Oh, thanks.
I'm like, first of all, if you haven't experienced it, I'm also just like skeptical to your opinion about it.
But I agree with that.
First and foremost. But yeah, absolutely. I want to make a very, clear statement about this. Painful periods, although common, are not normal, in the sense that we're not meant to be in pain. And when you're experiencing super painful periods, I refer to it as like your body is basically sending out a telegram to you, is trying to get your attention. Like, I need a little more support here. And I suffered too through painful periods really badly. Like, basically from the first moment I got my period at 12 and a half years old, 13 years, I don't remember if I was 12 or 13. Now I'm questioning. I think it was right before my 13th birthday. It basically painful immediately, mm-hmm. And it was like, my mom is like, yep, that's just how it's going to be, because that's how it always was for me. And I think mm-hmm. that is also, kind of another conversation of like, you can only do the best with the information that you have. You can only work with what you know. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, same sounds like a similar, process that you went through, where, I went to doctor after doctor, and the answer is get on hormonal birth control, which I did at age 15, despite not being sexually active and not needing it to prevent pregnancy. It was told to me, this will regulate, quote unquote, your period. This will regulate your cycle. What I didn't understand is that it actually pauses your cycle. It's not allowing ovulation to happen in the specific birth control. That's a whole other, conversation we can get into too, about so many different types of birth controls and how they work, how they interact with your cycle and interfere with your cycle. But, the combination pill, which is, I kind of think of as like the OG birth control, maybe, at least hormonal birth control. Yeah, basically turns off your cycle, because it turns off the processes that you don't ovulate. You don't go through that whole system, that whole timeline that I laid out a few minutes ago. And it's really important to understand that, because what you don't necessarily learn when you go on hormonal birth control is then once you get off of it, however many years later or whatever time period later, is those same problems that were underlying causing the painful period, causing the hormonal acne, causing the mood swings or PMS, the anxiety, the depression. Those aren't necessarily going to be solved from going on that. It's like something that is covering it up. It's putting a Band-Aid on through the time that you're using it. But the second you remove that Band-Aid, the wound is still underneath. Mm-hmm. And so just understanding that, like, a painful period is, although very common, it's not normal in the sense that you don't have to be experiencing it. And the thing I think that enraged me so much was, first, like, why are people suffering needlessly? This is literally ridiculous. And when I started, going through my own cycle healing journey and trying to find lifestyle habits that could help support healthier periods, and learning how I might take care of myself in a way that would support my cycle more and get rid of painful periods, I was like, are you telling me this entire time that it was actually this straightforward to find relief? And instead of focusing on lifestyle changes and educating people and encouraging people, it's like, just take this medicine and, stop bothering us, basically. Just stop complaining.
Yeah. That's so frustrating.
It just goes to show, like, the root of the problem. And Chloe Skurlak, fellow Canadian to you, she's amazing. I actually studied with her and learned fertility awareness method, which is a way of tracking your cycle, very specifically tracking your fertile symptoms to determine when your fertile window is, in order to achieve or avoid pregnancy naturally. So check her out on Instagram. She's amazing. I forgot where I was going with that. Distraction, thinking about how awesome Chloe is.
That's fair.
What was I saying about? Oh, I remember what I was going to say. Something that she always talks about, and I think is mind-blowing when you really sit down and think about it, is that the hormonal birth control pill is the only medicine that's been developed specifically for the use of perfectly healthy people to turn off a body function. For a totally other purpose, for a total different, goal or, priority in mind. And so you really have to think about, like, your menstrual cycle. If you are a cyclical being, if you have a menstrual cycle, it's really integrated part of you. It's not like one thing that's happening over here off to the side and all of your other body systems are happening independently. Everything is all connected. And I think it's really important to understand that, because then when you realize like, oh, estrogen doesn't just affect my uterus, it also affects my mood. It affects my energy. It affects my libido. It affects my cervical mucus and the discharge I might be feeling or seeing in underwear. It affects my skin. My skin might be a little drier when estrogen is high. All of these things, like, it was so mind-blowing to me. Like, I literally have goosebumps thinking about it. It was so mind-blowing to me to think, oh, wow, this is not all things happening randomly. It's actually very predictable when you learn how to track your cycle and understand your cycle. And so obviously I got completely obsessed in my own life. And then I was like, I have to share this with other people.
That's totally understandable.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this could be a two-parter, if you're okay with that. And I mean, not the most conventional to say this while we're recording a podcast, but would you be into doing a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Second part? Okay, so I'm thinking, just to lay it out for everybody listening and for yourself, I guess, but mostly for you, I guess, for everybody else as well, since we're in the middle of the podcast. But I'm thinking we could do the second part. If you want to, we can talk about different types of birth control, maybe how to like reduce pain, anything else that we don't have the space to.
Yes, for sure.
Chat about. And then if you have time today, I'm not sure what if you're still okay to stick around for a little bit longer. Do you mind sharing how to know if you are ovulating?
Yeah, for sure.
You feel like you could share?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we could kind of go through, and I actually have a whole podcast. It's like an 1.5 hour long podcast about this, about tracking your cycle.
Cool.
But I could go through the very basics of it. And I think going through like the very basics of how to begin tracking your cycle, I first want to take a little step back and talk about kind of this overall rhythm, because I think it becomes really clear for you to then be able to understand where you're at in your cycle. So I want to talk about circadian versus infradian rhythms. Circadian rhythm, every human has. This is our day and night clock, our 24-hour clock that's in our brain. It's the system, that clock that happens automatically, which alerts our brain and releases different hormones depending on time of the day. So it releases cortisol in the morning to help you wake up. It releases melatonin at night to help you fall asleep. And it's this 24-hour clock that repeats every 24 hours. People born female, people born male, everyone has this. Well, everyone has this, and it just happens automatically. Even, this is totally off subject, but so interesting that like even people in caves with complete darkness still have this 24-hour clock. So it's like very, it's super interesting, very integrated part of our brain. The cool thing about being a cyclical being, about having a menstrual cycle, is you have a second clock, which is an infradian rhythm, which infradian rhythm just means more than 24 hours, more than a day, Latin. And this is referring to our roughly 29-day cycle of the reproductive cycle, of the menstrual cycle or the ovulatory cycle, depending on how you want to name it. So we have this 24-hour clock repeating every 24 hours, but we also have this larger clock happening, this 29-day, 30-day roughly cycle. And so this 24-hour experience that you feel on day 4 of your cycle versus day 14 versus day 24 is going to feel different. And I think that's, if you were to come away from this podcast with one takeaway, with one lesson, it would be that as someone with a menstrual cycle, you are not meant to feel the exact same every day. It's normal to feel higher energy some days and lower energy others. It's normal to feel more social sometimes, or more like you just want to be by yourself. It's normal to have a higher libido some days, or to have a lower libido sometimes. And I think that's if I could leave the world with one lesson for menstruators, that would be it. And it's that you don't have to feel bad about yourself because you were quote unquote less productive some days of your cycle versus others, just because you didn't feel like socializing sometimes versus other times in your cycle. And I think that's the biggest thing, is learning how to understand these ups and downs, understand this cyclical way of living, because it's so different than how our society is set up. People born male with a male hormonal cycle, frankly, have a huge advantage, which, surprise, surprise, we live in a patriarchy. So like they set it up in a way that works for them and it makes sense. Their hormonal cycle matches that 24-hour cycle. Testosterone is highest in the morning. Then it begins to drop down, making them feel comfortable and more social. If for afternoon, literally happy hour works perfectly if you have a 24-hour testosterone cycle. And then it drops lowest at night for them to fall asleep. That's great. Like that's cool. As cyclical beings, we have a totally different system. And so it's really in learning how to live in a way that honors those differences. And this is where I think, we kind of talked about like not spiritually bypassing. And I think this is where a lot of people might miss the mark, because it all sounds great, but like not everyone has the luxury of aligning their whole life around their cycle. And a lot of people have jobs where they have to show up Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And that is what it is. And it's really important for the way that I try to help people is like really focusing on the things that are in our control, focusing on the things that you do have the ability to work on, instead of being like, well, you shouldn't be working on this on the first day of your cycle. Well, yeah, in a perfect world, every country would have menstrual leave and we'd be able to take off the first 2 days of our cycle and rest and take a bubble bath and meditate. And like, yeah, that would be my ideal world. But like, no one asked me when they were setting up this whole system, or I would have set it up like that. But that's not the case for a majority of people. Like, do I have that luxury currently as a yoga teacher? Yeah, but not everyone has that. And so I think it's really important to focus on the areas of your life that you are able to adjust, that you are able to control, asking for support when it's available to you from family members, friends, a partner, and just having that grace for yourself as a menstruator, because it's really easy to, I think it's really common to feel just so frustrated of like wishing, your cycle was a certain way, or wishing you felt differently, wishing you were able to fit in and show up and do the same thing every day. But like, it's just not, it's kind of like wishing it wasn't raining when it's raining. It's still going to be raining. You're just going to be in a bad mood about it, So, and just accepting, that kind of opening that door to acceptance, but also at the same time, gaining the education for the things that you can adjust, the things that you can change. So I would love to, well, I guess from that perspective, we can kind of go into beginning how to track your cycle. And again, I did an entire super long episode of my podcast about this. So, can go
I can link to it in the description too, if that's helpful.
Okay,
if anyone
cool.
wants to know more, I will put a little note to myself. You can link to that in the description. So if you want to know this isn't enough and you want more about cycle tracking, you can check out the link in the show notes.
Perfect. But we can get into the very basics of it. So I would say, like, if you're not tracking your cycle at all now, and you're like, I don't really know what's going on. All I know is, sometimes I bleed, and that's basically all I can figure out. The very first step is just start by tracking cycle day. Literally make a note as you start your next bleed, cycle day 1. And from there, literally just beginning to count the length of your cycle. And that'll already give you an insight to just see if your cycle fits into that kind of healthy parameters of being, again, average is 29-day cycle. But again, that depends on where you are in your life as a menstruator. If you're a new menstruator and you just began menstruation, it's normal to have more variability, as well as if you're ending your menstrual phase of life and you're starting through perimenopause or menopause, again, having more variability. But kind of within that middle years of a menstruating life, having a little more stability, more predictability in your cycles is what would be considered healthy, not having as much variability one cycle to the next. So again, just beginning just beginning very simply, charting cycle day 1, cycle day 2, et cetera, all the way till cycle day 28, 29, 30, whatever it is before you begin your next bleed. That already is going to help you feel more aware with this just simple kind of overview I gave earlier on of, oh, I'm on cycle day 10, like you talked about, you might be earlier, or maybe you said you're 10 days away from your next cycle.
10 days away from.
Okay.
Yeah. That's so like my app on my phone.
Well, your app thing. Yeah. So again, who knows for sure. Mm-hmm. But like let's say just for the sake of argument that you ovulated around cycle day 14. So that would put you like in your mid luteal phase. So with just that basic knowledge, you could think, okay, so probably, at this point in my cycle, I am progesterone dominant. I know I need to eat a little bit more. I know I need, maybe I'm not feeling as social as I did like 2 weeks ago. Maybe I need to prioritize a little more time alone. The luteal phase is a really great time to focus on like behind the scenes type tasks. It's a great time to finish things up. You have that same sort of energy of the nesting vibe that happens in pregnancy because your body is kind of nesting and preparing if a pregnancy might happen. And so it's a really natural time to like finish things up. Like it's usually the time in my cycle personally where I'm like just going down the to-do list, I'm finishing things, I'm shooting off emails, and it just feels a little more natural to do those kind of behind the scenes tasks versus in the first half of the cycle when estrogen is dominant. It might feel more natural to reach out, to do a podcast, to do a collaboration, do more forward-facing type tasks, be more social, go out with friends, maybe go on a date with a partner, those type of activities. So just starting tracking your cycle days and with a very kind of rough guideline of understanding what the 4 phases of the cycle are, you already put yourself in an advantage to understand what might feel most easeful. Of course, you can do anything at any time. Like we're all amazing. Like, you know what I mean? In terms of course you can do anything. There's no rule that says like, well, on your period, you shouldn't do this or like 100%, I never would subscribe to that. But also I'm a big supporter of work smarter, not harder. So like take advantage of your natural gifts, of your natural strengths at different times of your cycle. Make it easier on yourself. But yeah, like why not take advantage of your gifts? It's the same kind of concept of like, well, people might focus on like important meetings in the morning. People with a male hormonal cycle, might focus on like more important meetings in the morning or around midday, and then they have happy hour in the evening. Well, they're not doing happy hour at 8 a.m. because it feels more natural to have happy hour around 5 p.m. for people with a testosterone cycle. So like, let's take advantage of our cycle as well and work smarter, not harder. That's what I'm all about. And again, looking at those areas of your life that you can adjust, those things that you do have control over, instead of lamenting over all of the ways that are working against us and how our society is set up, because frankly it's a lot. So focusing on the areas that we can adjust, and really that comes to a lot of lifestyle changes, like understanding that at certain times of your cycle you need more sleep. And so maybe not scheduling social things during your period or in your late luteal phase, because you need you need an extra hour of sleep. And to give that gift to yourself is just it's like a huge vote of confidence in yourself, in your health. And it's supporting your cycle to support you back. So that's, like that. Yeah, thank you. I think that's how I've come over the last 5 years of my own cycle journey and, helping others as well. It's like finding that balance of both understanding what your cycle needs and not like what you can get out of it, but kind of like how it can support you as well. That symbiotic relationship. Because also that just makes it more fun. Instead of feeling like I'm constantly making so much effort to take care of it, it can feel nourishing as well, but also feeling like, oh, now I took care of it. And now I'm like day 4 of my cycle. I feel great. Like I'm still bleeding, but I feel energized. I feel supported. I feel nourished because I allowed myself that rest. So it's really like, it's like when you make your lunch the night before. It's like the next day at lunch, you're like, oh, past me was such a genius because now I have, you know what I mean? Like now I have lunch. Like, I feel great. It's that same concept. It's like taking, doing the things now that are going to help support you and just feel better for future you.
Yeah, that's cute. I like that. Is there any indications or like, so starting to track cycling, words got stuck. Just start by like, writing down the day you first start to bleed. Cycle one and just sort of go from there. Is there any like I know it's a complicated and long topic, but is there any indications that might suggest someone you are like the day you're ovulating?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that because that's exactly where I was going to go next. So getting a little more advanced. Like, okay, now you have that kind of general understanding. And actually, before I even get into that, I want to say one more thing. I'm sorry. As you're tracking the cycle days, I think a really important thing that you can do just tracking the cycle day and just tracking how you're feeling and kind of comparing it to that outline that I sort of laid out in the beginning of the episode, because you might not be feeling exactly how I described. Maybe when your estrogen is really high, you might be feeling anxious. Or you might be feeling, differently than how I described. So it's really important to also just, the science is one thing, like estrogen is rising before ovulation. That's a scientific fact. But how you feel with high estrogen is individual to you. All of our experiences of our cycles are as diverse as we all are as individuals. And so it's really important to getting in touch with your personal experience of it and getting aware of like, oh, usually when I'm around mid-cycle, I feel this way. And that allows you to then take advantage of those things. So first, I wanted to say that, but now I want to get into a little more advanced in terms of like, what are the things that you can track to know whether you are ovulating or, at what point you're ovulating. So I kind of mentioned a little earlier on in describing how the hormones affect our, internal body and the reproductive system and what's going on in there. One of the things that you can track to understand as you're approaching ovulation and also to help you understand after ovulation has passed is cervical mucus. Also sometimes referred to as cervical fluid. I guess cervical fluid sounds slightly better than cervical mucus, but I originally learned cervical mucus. So although it doesn't sound that great, it is the terminology I use. Not the prettiest word, I guess. But really what cervical mucus is different substances that your cervix is producing it's all about reproduction, right? Like, so really what cervical mucus purpose is in terms of your reproductive cycle is creating an ideal environment for sperm to survive so they can wait and meet the egg. Cervical mucus is actually fascinating and it has a lot of functions. It also, takes out defective sperm or less than healthy sperm. It helps the healthy, the kind of the best sperm reach the egg fastest. It does so many things. But being able to understand that pattern of how cervical mucus changes across your cycle will help you get aware of when you're ovulating. So as estrogen is rising in the follicular phase, estrogen is what is causing the cervical mucus to change both the quality and the amount. To put it very simply, a basic explanation of how cervical mucus changes across the cycle is around your period, you may or may not see cervical mucus, but again, you're bleeding. So that's what you're mostly going to notice here. After your period ends, you likely will have some dry days, but then as estrogen is continuing to rise, as you get closer to ovulation, that's when you might start to notice that lotiony, kind of creamy type cervical mucus. Now you might notice this in your underwear. You could feel it just sensationally, like as you're walking, you might feel just like more moisture, but also you can check it very scientifically. And this is like what Chloe Skurlak teaches, or fertility awareness, symptothermal methods of fertility awareness teach, is how to measure it like very specifically in a very regimented way. But basically just wiping with a square of toilet paper before you use the bathroom and after you use the bathroom, noticing the sensation that you feel, if it feels dry as you wipe across the perineum, that skin between the vagina and the anus, and noticing, does it feel dry? Does it feel kind of soft, or does it feel super slippery and lubricative? During that beginning of the follicular phase, you're getting closer to ovulation, first noticing that kind of lotiony, creamy. You might pick it up with your fingers from your underwear or the toilet paper and notice it's like lotion. It's like creamy kind of, it doesn't stretch, but it's like, I think lotion is the best way to describe it. Lotion or like mayonnaise, but again, kind of a gross visual there, but it is what it is. It is what it is. And then as you get closer and closer to ovulation, that's when the mucus changes. And that is your indication from a tracking perspective of, oh, I'm getting close to ovulation because I was wiping and was seeing lotiony. Now it's getting slipperier, more clear, and more stretchy, almost like egg whites. So you're seeing that pattern of dry right after your period. Then you might start to see lotiony. Then you see the super stretchy, clear, egg white, jelly type mucus. And then after ovulation, again, dry. And that is because, again, estrogen is dominant in the first half, progesterone is dominant in the second half. Estrogen is creating cervical mucus because it knows the egg is about to become available and wants the sperm to survive, kind of describe, you know what I'm trying to say, goal wise. And after ovulation has happened, after that 24 hours, there's no reason that sperm need to survive. There's no reason that sperm need to be there. And so progesterone dries cervical mucus, it thickens cervical mucus, and you likely will have dry days leading up until your next period. So that's putting it very simply in terms of something that you can track and be aware of. And I know different apps track different things, and a lot of apps have ability to put in cervical mucus, to notice when it's lotiony, to notice when it's egg white. And again, there's so many intricacies to learn and to understand, but that's to put it most simply. After your period, you might have some dry days. You get closer to ovulation, you start to see that lotiony. You're approaching or ovulating within these days that you have that super egg white, stretchy like mucus. And then after that, maybe you see a couple lotiony days and then dry roughly for the rest of your cycle. Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you. I'm going to try this and see.
Yay.
I think that's really helpful. Yeah. And then, like you said, maybe it'll help give me some answers.
And help you have some awareness. And the second thing that you can track, which is a very easy thing to track that will help you not predict when you're approaching ovulation. Cervical mucus really helps you see, oh, I'm getting closer and closer to ovulation. And then once it dries up, you realize you've passed ovulation. Another thing that you can measure and track every single day that will help you confirm after ovulation has passed is your basal body temperature. And I'll again describe very briefly. Again, this is like an overview. There's so many intricacies, so many things to learn. But this is a very brief overview and understanding why taking your temperature every morning could give you any insight into what's happening in your reproductive cycle. So progesterone, which is dominant after ovulation, which is dominant in the roughly second half of your cycle, has a thermogenic effect on the body, actually raises your body temperature. And you only produce progesterone after you ovulate. So when you take your temperature every single morning, you see a pattern of basically lower temperatures pre-ovulation to a shift to higher temperatures post-ovulation. And again, there are a lot of rules in terms of tracking your temperature in a way that's like a regimented way to get an accurate understanding and accurate reading, because so many things can affect our temperature. If you have a little fever, of course, then your temperature is different. If you had alcohol the night before, that can affect your temperature. Your waking and sleeping time affects your temperature because our temperature rises and falls as we wake up and fall asleep in that circadian rhythm. All comes back to rhythm. My whole life is rhythms and cycles.
Cool.
So fascinating. It's like, wow, there's so many amazing things happening inside our bodies every day. It gives you a little appreciation. But to put it very simply, taking your temperature at the same time every morning before getting out of bed, best practices that I learned and that I use is taking a glass thermometer. This is a pen, but taking a glass thermometer under the armpit, keeping it there for 10 full minutes, because that really allows to get the most accurate reading, and just simply marking it down and noticing that general pattern of low temperatures pre-ovulation, higher range of temperatures post-ovulation. And when you're tracking both temperature and cervical mucus, it's really helpful because you can kind of compare them back and forth. Like, oh, I noticed my temperature is like a whole degree higher. And I can actually see, if I look at my cervical mucus, like 3 days ago, I had that super egg white like mucus, and now it's dry. So now I can see both my mucus is dried up, which is an indication of progesterone being dominant, and my temperature is high, which is an indication of progesterone being dominant. That means I've already ovulated and I moved into that post-ovulation luteal phase.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's helpful. Thank you so much.
This isn't super overwhelming because I know it's like a lot.
No, I mean, it's a lot, but I think it's all really important stuff. And I think that it's like we talked about at the beginning, it's so important to talk about and to have more education on. And I learned a lot from this. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm really, as long as you're down, really stoked for part 2. I think totally. I'm really excited about it, and I feel like I'm just going to keep learning more. I don't know. I just feel very excited about this episode and everything that you've shared. So I'm really grateful for you being here and sharing your time.
Thank you so
and
much.
Being willing to come back.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love, like, in part, because I feel there's just, we did like so much educating aspect side of it. And I would love, like you said, in part 2 to kind of get into more of like, okay, now I know all this, but now what do I do with it? You know, what do I actually do? So I'd love to get into, as you said, the kind of basically more what I do in terms of the cyclical aligning, the cyclical living, how to actually adjust these lifestyle pieces. What can I do to support a healthier, more regular less painful cycle, treating PMS and period pain and all of that, and focusing on that aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that'd be really great. I'm really excited to hear about that. Can you tell folks in the meantime where they can find you? If there's anything you want to plug or let us know?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm most active on Instagram, probably too active on Instagram. But you can find me there at cyclical_yoga. That's CYCLICAL_YOGA. That's where I'm most active. Just send me a DM like, hey, I heard you on Billy's podcast and my mind is, running amok with a million questions. Like, I love chatting. You can probably tell. Love talking about this stuff. So feel free to reach out anytime. In terms of plugging different stuff, I actually have a few things happening soon that I'm super excited about. One is a cyclical yoga membership. So it's actually a monthly membership with essential practices for healthy cycles. So basically, everything that we're going to touch on in our second episode of like, what do I actually do with all of this knowledge? How do I support healthier cycles? How can I live in alignment with my cycle? And then actually the practices that are going to help you do that. So you have, both the education piece and the supportive practices simultaneously in a perfect little, package with a bow. Weekly little package. So that's opening very soon. I actually really wanted to open in April, but we just moved from South America and life is a little disheveled at the moment, but getting back on track, getting organized. So that's coming up really soon. And then also, I haven't even announced this yet. So this is like prime announcement, exclusive. Yeah. You heard it here first, folks. I'm releasing basically a cycle tracking guide because, it's something that I talk about all the time, obviously. And it really is tracking your cycle effectively is really the basis for pretty much everything that I talk about, everything that I teach, because first, learning how to, of course, care for your cycle, you need to understand the specific and changing needs you have across the different phases of the cycle. And then also, in order for you to take advantage of these natural gifts, of these benefits and taking care of yourself better, you have to understand how to track it first, of course. So I'm releasing a whole guide that is going to be basically a lower ticket offer and allowing hopefully more accessibility. And of course, have my podcast as well, which is a totally free offer, free for everyone to use. Please do. And you can find that on Spotify, the Cyclical Yoga Podcast. But yeah, so that, the Cyclical Yoga membership coming out soon, the guide coming out soon as well. So those are things where especially for people who are just getting into cycle tracking, just learning about their cycles, those are going to be really essential offers that I think can support them with that journey.
Cool. Thank you so much. And I will link to your, just in case anyone's like listening to this when you're driving or whatever, and you didn't have a chance to write any of that down. I'm just going to let you know that in the show notes, I will put a link to Ashley's Instagram, and what else did I say? Oh, the podcast episode. And then, is that all the links that you want me to put?
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll find everything on there. Yeah.
People can find me there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for sharing your time and for being here today. This has been really great. And we'll see you for part 2.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Can't wait to come back.
Thanks.
I would love to know how you felt about that episode, because personally loved it. I don't often think that I could go back and listen to an episode again, mainly because of just hearing my own voice for that long. Not because of the content or the guests, just literally because of hearing my voice again. But this episode, I feel like, is one that I could go back and listen to, just because there's so much stuff I didn't know and I learned about. And also, this stuff has been taboo, quotes, taboo, for way too long. So I'm just so excited about this episode and to share it with you. There's a little bit of a sneak peek in there, see if you caught it, about an episode that's going to be coming up soon. So if you caught it, maybe send me a message and see. Maybe you get a little prize. Who knows? Let's just do an impromptu contest. If you have questions for me, if you have feedback for me, send me an email, info@movewithbillie, BILLIE.com. So movewithbillie, BILLIE.com. And you can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I think that's it. @movewithbillie, MOVEWITH, BILLIE. I mostly, honestly, if you want to actually chat with me, better bet to find me on Instagram than the other ones. I am a little bit better at using the other ones too, though. In the show notes, you can find all sorts of links to work with me for freebies, stuff like that. And the other thing I'll share here too, if you are a yoga teacher, movement teacher, life coach, you do any kind of online work that's one-on-one or with a group, I have been using Offering Tree for the past year with my website, and it honestly kind of does everything. I do my newsletter through Offering Tree. I have my schedules, like schedule clients through Offering Tree. I can book time off through Offering Tree. I take payments through it. It kind of replaces a bunch of different things. And also, most importantly for me at the time when I decided to go with it, it hosts all of my on-demand videos. And you can set it up for courses and stuff like that too. I have my Rebel Movement 101 course on there too. And I really like it. It kind of has all the things I need. So I don't have to have 5 million different subscriptions, which as a small business, honestly, makes a huge difference and makes a really big difference that it's all in one place. So I'm not being paid to say this. However, if you use the link in my show notes, you will get a big discount for signing up. And then I will get a little bit of money for that. So if you feel like supporting me, my podcast and the work I do with my business, and you want to if you want to start a website, you want to start to have a bunch of this set up, got distracted because my captions disappeared. Use a link in the show notes is what I'm trying to say. If you want to support me, but you don't really need a website, you can also buy me a coffee. I think it's like $2, $5, something like that. Link in the show notes. And I want to say thank you. This is, I think, the first episode that I officially have a wonderful human who is helping me with the captions. They are going through the captions or the transcript and double checking all the spelling because it spells my name wrong all the time, getting rid of all the extra stuff, making sure it's saying all the right things. And I just want to say thank you so much to Elise, who I'm really excited is my official first person I've kind of hired, like not we're doing anyway, this part doesn't matter. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to edit this whole thing. Sorry, Elise. Someone I've hired as a private contractor and just for the first steps, and I'm really excited. I'm so appreciate the help. So thank you to Elise. Check out Offering Tree if you'd like. Buy me a coffee, please. And to like help support this work, this podcast is quite a bit of work, and I don't make money from it. It does support my business in terms of it gives me lots of space to have content for it and stuff like that, and resources that I can share. But anything and everything you can help me out with is appreciated. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye.